Knowing when to pay cash and when to use your points is a question that even the most seasoned Miles & Points pros frequently ask themselves. And your gut reaction may be to use your points when you can get a good redemption value, but it's not quite that simple, and there's actually a lot of nuance to this question. So today let's go over some of the scenarios and rules that I follow when deciding between cash or points to stretch both further and ultimately travel more. Let's start with a few scenarios where it almost always makes sense to pay with cash. The first is when you're booking a really short or cheap flight, whether that be a domestic flight or even a short international flight. As you'll see throughout this video, every scenario is going to be a little bit different, but in my experience, 95% of the time, if you're looking at a really short flight that's less than $100, then you're almost always better off paying with cash and saving your points. And that same rule applies for hotel stays as well. Now, on a similar note, if you happen to have travel credits that are about to expire, or maybe there's a travel credit card in your wallet that offers some kind of specific benefit, like the Amex Platinum's $200 Fine Hotels and Resorts credit, then that's another case where you'd be wise to just go ahead and put that credit to good use and again, save your points. Another scenario I frequently find myself in is when the taxes and fees on an award redemption are ridiculously high. And one brand that definitely comes to mind with this one is Virgin Atlantic. Don't get me wrong, I love Virgin Atlantic, but they are notorious for having insane taxes and fees on their award bookings. Take a look at this amazing award redemption that I got last year for an upper class flight from London to Washington for less than 30,000 points. Pretty insane, but if converted to USD, that great redemption came with over $800 in fees per person. Now, that specific experience is one that I would never pay for with cash, and we'll talk more about those unique experiences when we get to the argument for using your miles. But the point I'm trying to make here is don't get so caught up in the excitement of a great redemption value that you neglect the fact that the taxes and fees in that scenario cost more than the cash price of an equivalent economy seat. Similarly, and this is another mistake that I personally make all the time, sometimes it makes sense to pay cash if there is a cheaper alternative on a different airline or route. Let me explain. Sticking with Virgin Atlantic, sure, they say that the cash price of that business class seat is over $10,000, which probably makes you feel pretty good about your 30,000 point redemption, despite the high taxes and fees that we just talked about. I know that I felt pretty good about it when I booked it. But when you consider you could fly from nearby Dublin Airport in Aer Lingus business class for just $2,000, which mind you is nearly what we paid in fees alone on our award redemption, and you start to wonder if you'd be better off just paying cash for an alternative airline or route. Now, before you cook me in the comments, obviously that is not an apples to apples comparison, and having flown on both airlines, Virgin Atlantic is much nicer, but it's not 5 times the price nicer. So if there's an alternative airline or similar route that is significantly less than the cash price on your award seat, then you might want to think twice before burning those miles and points. Really quick, before we get back to some more tips on points versus cash, we need to have a heart-to-heart about something that I actually need your help with. You may have heard that legislation known as the Credit Card Competition Act has been slowly making its way through Congress, and if signed into law, could turn the entire miles and points world on its head.
I don't like the sound of that.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Brendan, isn't talking about proposed legislation in the US Congress a bit above your pay grade? Yes, it definitely is, but as a guy who is literally on a trip right now in Bali that I paid for using miles and points, needless to say, this is something that I really care about. And my guess is that as a Daily Drop viewer yourself, you probably don't want to see your miles and points go away either. The intention of this proposal is to limit interchange fees that merchants pay to payment networks like Visa and MasterCard. But doing so would actually limit the issuer's ability to fund loyalty programs and secure their payment networks, both of which are bad for you, the consumer. Thankfully, today's video sponsor, Protect Your Points, has created a super easy form where you enter a few details, and in 30 seconds, you're able to take action and reach out to your local representative and help stop this proposal in its tracks. Just click the first link down in the description to stop Congress from taking off with your credit card reward points, and thank you so much for your help with this. All right, back to the video. The last argument for paying cash before we get to when it makes sense to pay with points is if you're trying to earn status. I want to be clear that this is not always the case, and there are plenty of airlines and hotels that still allow you to progress towards status even on award redemptions, but you definitely want to read the fine print for the brand that you're trying to earn status with, because sometimes those award bookings won't do anything for you in terms of progressing towards higher status tiers. I wouldn't let that be the driving factor in your decision, but something you do want to keep in mind. All right, so there's there's definitely a time and place for using cash, and as I've talked about before, all of this miles and points stuff isn't about covering every aspect of your travel with points and never having to pay any money. As nice as that sounds, it's just not realistic for most of us. But as a miles and points nerd myself, I use points far more often than I pay with cash, and the first scenario where you'll want to dip into your stash of points is of course on a high redemption value ticket or hotel. I realize that I told you to ignore this at the start of the video, and it isn't always the most important variable, but one of the biggest benefits of using miles and points is getting outsized value and getting to experience things that you may otherwise not be able to afford if you were paying cash. If you're new to all of this stuff, then you can calculate your redemption value, sometimes called the cents per point or CPP, by taking the cash price of that flight or hotel, subtracting the taxes and fees that would apply to your award booking, and then dividing that number by the number of points required. Let's use this flight from Washington to Paris as an example. Cash price for a standard economy seat is $652, and if we search for that exact same seat through Flying Blue, we can see that there are $98 in taxes and fees. So we'll subtract that from the cash price and then divide that number by the 20,000 points required in this scenario, giving us a redemption value of 2.7 cents per point. Which of course brings us to the million-dollar question of this entire video: what is considered a good enough redemption value to justify using your points? Well, as you may have expected, there's unfortunately no hard rule on that one, but speaking from my own experience, if I can get about 2 cents of value per points, I will almost always use my points instead of paying cash. On the hotel side of things, it can get a little bit more tricky because with the exception of Hyatt, it's pretty rare to get over 2 cents per point, so in those cases, you really want to assess how many points you have, the experience that you're getting from that particular hotel, and make your decision based on some of those variables instead of just the redemption value. But at the very least, you want to get over 1 cent of value per point on hotels, otherwise I would personally just go ahead and pay with cash. So getting a good redemption value is great, but another case where I'll opt to pay with my points instead of cash, even if it isn't a great redemption value, is on a really expensive or unique experience. Years ago on our honeymoon, I surprised Aaron with a one-night stay at a castle in Lucerne, Switzerland. And while it pains me to this day how many points I burned on that one night, we were broke newlyweds at the time, and I think the cash price was like $800 per night, which even today would be really hard for me to justify. So sure, I probably burned like 80,000 points on that experience at a terrible redemption value, but despite us now having visited over 30 countries together, Aaron still talks about that castle to this day, and it's a memory that we wouldn't have if not for miles and points. So if there's some kind of unique experience or something that is financially out of reach if paid in cash, then sometimes you've just got to put that redemption value aside and put those points to good use. Which brings us to my last but perhaps most important argument for using your points, and that is simply if your points are burning a hole in your pocket, it's probably time to use them. By no means do I want to scare anybody or make you feel like you should run out and spend all of your points immediately, but let this be your friendly reminder that loyalty programs frequently get devalued. I've personally had an account shut down that had over 90,000 points in it, and in general, it's just not a great idea to be sitting on a mountain of miles and points. Remember, these are nothing more than a tool that can give you amazing travel experiences. So I can't encourage you enough. If you're sitting on a bunch of points waiting for that perfect redemption value, just go ahead and use your points. You can always earn more, and at the end of the day, it's about making travel memories with the people you love, and that is far more important than getting a great redemption value. But of course, that is just my opinion, so let me know what you think of this debate down in the comment section and what rules you use to decide between cash and points. Be sure to check out our top travel credit cards page down in the description, where you can learn more about the latest welcome offers on some of our favorite credit cards, and by signing up using our links, you're also helping to support all of this free content that we make here at Daily Drop, which our entire team really appreciates. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.